He wasn't my blood uncle. He was my biological aunt's brother-in-law. My mom used to date sketchy guys when I was a teenager. I didn't live with her much because she was a horrible role model. So my grandmother raised me for a big chunk of my life, and I am thankful for that because she taught me many values and how to be a lady. I later moved in with my father and stepmother and my half-siblings when I was around 15, and I had a wonderful life with them. But let's rewind the clock to when I was 14. At the time I lived with my mother and her sleazy boyfriend named Dale. We were on the second story of a duplex. Her boyfriend had this friend who would come over occasionally, who looked just like the white guy from Jerky Boys. Same hair too. He always creeped me out because he kept staring at me, and I would always catch him in the act. My aunt lived down the block, and I would visit her quite frequently because she was one of those cool aunts. She was in her 20s, super fun, and had this 1969 Firebird convertible that she would drive around in and blast rock music. When I would visit her house, I would sometimes run into her brother-in-law. His name was Jeff, Uncle Jeff. He was renting out her basement. I kinda thought he was weird, but an okay guy. So one night at around 11:30, I was home by myself when I get a knock on the door. Our door had a square glass panel toward the top that was painted over, with a small peephole scratched into it. When I looked through, I could see that it was Jeff on the other side. I opened the door. "Oh, hey Jeff, what's up? Hey, is your mom or Dale home?" "No, mom's at work, and I don't know where Dale is." He then asked me to come downstairs because he wanted to talk to me. This didn't raise any red flags because I considered him family. I was also pretty timid and didn't like saying no to people, especially adults. So I follow him downstairs to the front porch. I see his car is parked and still running with the headlights on. Sitting in the passenger seat with the window rolled down was the other creepy guy I alluded to earlier, Jerky Boy. I paused. What's he doing here?" Hey, relax. We just want to talk. We wanted to ask you something." He began to gently guide me toward the car. My adrenaline began pumping, and all of a sudden, I felt something wasn't right. I stopped and pulled back a little, trying my best not to look scared. Jeff kept talking sweetly, running his finger up my shoulder to fix my spaghetti strap. "Oh, it's okay. Just come closer to me. There's no reason to be afraid." I pulled away politely and said, "Whatever it is you need to ask me, you can ask me right here." He kept trying to convince me just to come to the car and said that if I was too scared, I could just stand in front of the headlights. The second he said that, my stomach did a leap and my whole body started to feel electrically charged because I knew if I stood in front of the headlights, I would not be able to see, making it easy for one of them to grab me. At that very moment, I knew I was in a dangerous situation, so I started acting ditzy and dumb because I was afraid to let them know that I was onto them and that they were doing something that would land them in prison. And he would just grab me right then and there, cover my mouth, and drag me into the car so that I couldn't tell anyone. So I started to playfully joke around and said that I wasn't wearing shoes and that I didn't want to step in dog shit. I could see that Jerky Boy was now starting to come out of his car. Then I sprinted back upstairs, running as fast as I could and locking the door behind me. I was shaking so bad. Not a minute later, Jerky Boy is knocking on the door, and he's looking through the makeshift peephole. He starts saying that he needs to talk to my mom's boyfriend, Dale. I say that he's not here, so he stops knocking, but I don't hear him descending the stairs. 30 seconds after that, Jeff comes up and knocks. and is talking to me through the door, saying that he needed to talk to Dale, and then tries opening the door. However, it's locked. For the third time, I repeat that Dale wasn't there. "Oh, I'm sorry if we scared you, sweetheart. We just wanted to talk to you." That was bullshit. I was afraid that they were going to try to kick the door in, so I decided that I was going to try and sneak out the back. I walked toward the back door, and thank God I looked out the window first, because I saw the silhouette of Jerky Boy standing downstairs at the back door. So now, Jeff was at the front door, trying to sweet-talk me, and his friend was waiting out back. I know what you're probably thinking. Call the cops. I don't know why I didn't. I know it's stupid. I think it was because I was so naive and timid. Jeff was my uncle after all. I was also questioning myself and my own judgments, because Jeff kept reassuring me at the front door. So I returned to the front door, and Jeff is still there, telling me that he felt horrible for scaring me. I then tell him, trying my best to disguise any hint of fear in my voice, that everything was okay, and that I was so sorry that I got scared. I tried my best to placate him and convince him that I believed what he told me. They eventually left, and once the coast was clear, I snuck out and ran to a friend's house. I didn't tell them anything about what happened. I just said that I was scared and wanted to stay there until my mom got home. I did tell my mother about what happened, but nothing ever came of it. And thankfully I moved into my dad's house 45 miles away 3 months later. I never saw those two men again. When I was in elementary school, my parents worked long hours and wouldn't get off until it was very late in the day. I would stay in an after-school program that took place in our cafeteria. Not because I had to, but because it was more conducive with my parents' schedule. It usually consisted of doing homework and playing board games until around 5 p.m. Even then, some kids would be waiting around the pickup area for an hour or even more, and I would join them while a chaperone waited with us. I was almost always the last kid to be picked up, so whenever I would leave, so would the assigned chaperone. One day, the chaperone really needed to use the restroom. That day we were the last ones in the pickup area. He told me not to leave until he got back. So I was sitting there on the ground against the wall, when suddenly, a car pulled up. A bearded man in a flannel shirt and dark sunglasses lowered the passenger window and said, "Come on, let's go. Your dad can't pick you up today. I'm your uncle." I just sat there gripping my backpack, staring at him, completely frozen. I didn't recognize him, and I was scared, so I didn't say anything. I was confused and I didn't know what to do. Could this guy really be my uncle? Had something happened to my dad? The man seemed to get impatient, and with a stern voice, he said, "Get in the car now. Your dad got hurt. We need to go see him. Hurry." I still sat there, not moving. It was then that the chaperone returned, and as soon as he appeared, the car sped off. The chaperone wasn't able to get the license plate number and told my parents about it when they came to pick me up. From that day on, the school took extra precautions and assigned more chaperones to watch the children after school, which was a good thing. But I still wonder what would have happened if I believed him and naively went with him. He also must have been watching us for some time, because he showed up as soon as the chaperone left. This could have easily happened to a student who was younger than me, who wouldn't have known better. It's sad, but not everyone knows about stranger danger. Just watch your local news. When I was 15 years old, My great uncle passed away due to a sudden heart attack. My father and I had to clean out his house since no one else in the family could do it. My uncle was loved by all of us and was one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. My father was broken up about losing him, but the job had to be done. His house was very neat and well organized, so we would be done in a day or two at most. I remember as a kid, we would play over at his house sometimes, whenever my parents had to work. He would allow us to play anywhere in the house, except for the attic. He made it very clear to us that going up and down the ladder to the attic was very dangerous. Therefore, we never went up there, and I never thought anything of it. Even though he would go up there sometimes for about 30 minutes, then come back down, never actually bringing anything with him or taking anything up there. While we were cleaning, I decided to finally go up to the attic just to see what was up there. It was completely empty, except for 2 boxes that were tucked away in a corner. Thinking nothing of it, I picked up the dusty boxes and took them downstairs to the living room. I opened them expecting to see some old papers because the boxes were so light. Instead, what I found were pictures. Hundreds and hundreds of photos of 3 different women. From all the angles, you could clearly tell they didn't know they were being photographed. He had pictures from daytime to night and from multiple locations. In some they were undressed, and in others they were doing everyday things like cleaning and cooking. My heart started to beat faster and faster. Looking closer, I realized one of the women was his wife, who had passed away several years earlier. I looked on the back of the pictures, and they were named. I didn't want to freak my family out without knowing what exactly I was looking at. So out of curiosity, I found the other 2 names of the women on Facebook. I was glad to find out that they were alive and okay. Once finding that out, I showed the pictures to my father, and he was just as shocked as I was. He took the boxes and I've never seen them again, and we never spoke of it. Still, I find myself wondering why he had those pictures, and if he took them himself or had someone else take them. I loved my great uncle very much, and I couldn't imagine him being anything less than a stand-up guy. I don't know what to make of this, to be honest. I know this may not seem like a very scary story, but it most certainly freaked my father and I out pretty bad. Before I begin, I'm from Russia. My English isn't that great, but I'll try my best. I was really struggling on whether or not I wanted to share this story because I am still disturbed and shaken up to this day. I grew up in a wealthy family. Both of my parents had enough money to get me into the best schools in Russia, and I remember going to many places during the summer breaks, and to this day, those are still my fondest memories. My parents had steady jobs, and they were mostly happy together. However, my father was never very fond of my mother's side of the family, especially my uncle and both of my grandparents. For whatever reason, they didn't get along with my dad. My mom tried pleasing everyone, lending them money, even though they would never pay her back. However, things got to a point where they turned on each other. My uncle really wanted my grandparents' house, even though he already had a huge house of his own. However, the house would go to my mother after they passed away, to square off any debts. He didn't really like this arrangement, but couldn't do anything about it. As fate would have it, both of my grandparents died in the same year. My grandfather had a condition where his left side was completely paralyzed. He slipped into a coma for a week before he woke up. His last words to this day have resonated with me. He told my uncle that he never got what he wanted because he was a greedy bastard. A couple of hours later, my grandfather passed away. My grandmother's health deteriorated not long after that. My mother became very depressed after this and was diagnosed with breast cancer the next year. Thankfully, she is still alive today, but she is not the same as she used to be. She had to stop going to work because she couldn't handle the stress. My father tried opening up a new business because he made the mistake of listening to my cousin. My father was hesitant at first, but my mother convinced him to do it. Since she didn't have a job, this could be something that she could occupy her time with. My father invested a lot of money into opening up this new business. My cousin was also heavily involved and influenced my father in all his investments. By the time he finalized everything, our financial future depended on this business being successful. He was risking a lot. By this time I was in high school, while my sister was going to college. This was when the worst possible thing happened to my family. The business that my father invested so much money into did not go as planned, and he ended up closing it down. He tried selling it off, but nobody bought it for the longest time. We were now broke and asking loan sharks for money. We couldn't go anywhere. I was too embarrassed to tell my friends or anyone else for some reason. While all this was happening, my uncle had moved into my grandparents' house and would ignore my mom's calls, even though my grandparents' will clearly stated the house belonged to my mother. My uncle built a fence so that nobody could trespass. The police were no help at all, and we had no money to hire someone to help us move him out of there, and we also couldn't fight him in court. As bad as things were, the worst was yet to come. We ended up being evicted from our house, unable to pay our mortgage with most of our things now belonging to the loan sharks. I spent an entire week homeless in the winter with my parents, and if you know anything about Russia, it gets rather cold there. These were the most painful days of my life. We ended up staying at a shelter. My mother tried ending her own life a couple of times, but we would always intervene. No one wanted to help my family. Until one day I got a call from a childhood friend. Her name was Olga. Her family agreed to take me in until my parents got back on their feet. Olga's father had a close friend who was a lawyer and said that he would look into the case regarding my grandparents' house. My mother was the rightful owner, but the Russian police would not lift a finger until they had a court order, which would cost money, which is something we didn't have. That's how things work over here. For the next 6 months, I stayed at Olga's place, and we grew closer than ever, and even started dating. During this time, I eventually went back to school. The lawyer told my parents that he would be able to repossess my grandparents' house. On the day of the hearing, it took the judge 2 seconds after reviewing my grandfather's will. But my uncle still refused to cooperate, which was a big mistake. Here in Russia, the police do not mess around. I remember watching him being dragged through the snow, beaten until he was unconscious, and then thrown into the back of a squad car. Now you might think that this is where things get better, but as soon as my uncle was out of jail, he tried everything in his power to make us homeless again. He hired some people to break in and rob us. Rocks would be thrown at our windows, and we would be harassed in public. We tried reporting him, but we had no proof. My grandparents' house was very isolated, and not too many people were passing by, which made it an easy target. During a walk, my sister was almost assaulted by some men, but thankfully, she was able to get away. Once my father was financially stable again, he hired a private detective to monitor our house. They captured a photo of my uncle breaking into our house. My guess is that he ran out of money to hire people to do it for him. We reported this to the police and showed them the photos. He was charged with breaking and entering, among many other things, and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. My cousins and my aunt tried to contact us and would leave messages on our answering machine, calling us the worst names possible and that we should have died in the freezing cold, and that someday we are going to pay for everything that we did. but eventually they stopped reaching out to us. Thank God for that. Since the events of this story, I have finished college and was able to start a successful business with some friends of mine, and I'm doing well for myself. I just hope that whenever my uncle gets out of prison, he doesn't try to start anything with my family again.